Hi everyone, welcome to the second last session of Unicon 2021. I hope you all have enjoyed the 3-day long fun-filled Unicon platform with insightful sessions conducted by many speakers. My name is Janice and I'm an assistant HR manager at Unilever and your host for today's very exciting session, Unilever Digital Applications 101. The session is highly requested by many of our applicants, and I hope that through today's session, we'll be answer many of your burning questions. If you do have any questions, feel free to pop it into the Q&A box on the right side of your screen, and we'll answer them throughout the session. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Shah, our campus recruiter, onto the stage to give you all a one-on-one on our digital application. Over to you, Shah.
Nice. Thank you, Janice. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for making time for today's session. Today, I've curated some of my top asked questions and some of the hottest questions in relation to our digital application journey to make sure that you guys feel a lot more confident, a lot more comfortable when you are undergoing the digital application journey with Unilever, but not just with Unilever, to be honest. A lot of the companies out there are also adopting a very similar application process and journey. And I wanted you guys to really give yourself the bestest shot. So I will be sharing some tips and tricks. But don't worry, at the very end of the session, you guys get to ask me some of your burning questions and connect with me on LinkedIn if you have any further questions for that. Okay? All right, let's get started. So today's journey, we're going to be speaking about a couple of things. First of all, I'm going to introduce myself, and then we're going to go exactly into our digital application journey and a couple of tips and tricks on how to ace them, including some of the programs that we have opened right now for applications, which I'm sure a lot of you are very interested in. All right. So an introduction about myself. I've met possibly some of you guys in the audience, probably hired some of you, but just a very general introduction on myself. That's myself in when I was like 3 years old with my cousin. He's one of the closest human beings to me. What happened after that is history, but I graduated from SMU in 2017, majoring in sociology and HR. And back when I was in SMU, I was figuring things out for myself. What exactly do I want to do? Do I want to focus on sociology or do I want to focus on HR? And I'm lucky enough to have been given a shot at HR in my throughout my entire internship journey in SMU, and which translated into my first job straight out of graduation. I was with AbbVie, a pharmaceutical giant. I was doing more of the HR operations, a little bit of business partnering with them, but a lot more focus in terms of HR operations. At that juncture, when I joined them after about 1.5 years, I decided to take a leap of faith and try a different track in HR, which is basically under campus recruitment. So if you could see on the furthest right of the screen, that those are some of the interesting moments that I've had in Unilever, and that is my current family right now. I see them all the time. If you could see that, that's me irritating my boss with the massage ball. But yeah, my journey with Unilever so far has translated from a campus recruitment role. And currently, I am sort of looking and managing the early careers program with Unilever. So whatever internship programs that we have out there for early careers, that's where I'm focused on right now, besides just recruiting them. All right. That's just a little bit about myself. Now, the more interesting part about the session is in relation to the programs that we have, right? Now, I'm going to go into deeper detail of each and every single one of these programs later on. But I wanted to ask the audience, right? Which one of these programs would have a digital journey? And yep, you're right. It's every single one of the programs. So you have to make sure that if you are applying for any of these programs, you must understand the overall digital journey that we have implemented, researched, piloted, and done for these different programs. And I'll go into greater detail in terms of the historical journey of our digital application process. Okay. So if you could see here, what is digital application with Unilever? Why did we decide to pioneer it? But essentially, the digital application journey with Unilever started back in 2016 when we pioneered it after years and years and years of research. So we've had a lot of data points to play around with, data points of our ULIP hired years ago, data points of our UFLPs hired years ago, just to ensure that we're on the right track. So when we started out in 2016, I would say it was not as popular as it is right now. We were one of the first few companies to do it. But essentially, when we piloted it, it was pretty groundbreaking for the candidates in Singapore because, for the first time ever, Unilever had to adopt a fully digitized application journey with the final checkpoint with Unilever through what we call the Discovery Center or face-to-face interview. So back then, it was a lot of us teaching students on how to go through the different stages successfully up till the very last stage of the selection process. That was 2016. All the way till 2021, we've done quite a lot of change. I would say we've created and used a lot more data points. We've adopted an AI approach. We've changed up certain things. We've localized certain things to make sure that our AI doesn't screen out people of color, for example, certain accents or slangs. We just wanted to make sure that our AI is as comprehensive as possible so that we can prioritize some of our submissions. But don't worry if you think that you're being filtered out. Unilever, at least, we make sure that we go through some of our video submissions from all of our candidates, right? Which is why I would say I would sometimes have to apologize to my candidates. Hey, I'm super sorry for reaching out to you late. You've been shortlisted. It's because we really do take a lot of time to screen through your submissions. So yes, you are right. We do review your video interview. And we're apologetic for taking some time, but we want to make sure that you guys are not funneled out. We always want to make sure that we don't rely too much on AI, and that manual work still takes place behind the scene. So right now in 2021, so far we've had actually a lot more than 1 million applications across the 60 countries that we've implemented in. And we've created such an integrated, seamless candidate experience for you guys where you'll be able to receive a lot sharper candidate feedback because we felt that that's a gift from us to you. You've taken some time to go through the application process. You've probably set aside a couple of hours to prepare for it. So that's a gift from Unilever to yourself, and I hope that it becomes beneficial. Yeah. And of course, throughout the digital journey, one key point that you have to understand is that as much as we know and understand that it's the best way in terms of a selection process model, we will constantly and we will commit to learning and relearning throughout our journey. There's of course going to be a lot of fun and exciting things for the digital application journey in itself. But yes, that is the historical perspective of the digital application journey in Unilever. Okay, now that I've set some historical context for you guys, I now want to go through in deeper detail what exactly does a digital journey look like for us and which part of the digital journey will I be focusing on today. So here you can see a couple of stages. I know it's a little bit intimidating, it's a little bit scary, but hear me out. It's simpler than you think. So level 1 is super simple. Submit your digital application through our links, right? And this time around, we will be allowing students to use their LinkedIn profile to put in certain information that you think is important for Unilever recruiters to take note of. Yeah. And once you're done submitting your application, in level 2, that's when the cognitive assessments begin, right? And that's the gamification stage. That's when I would say it's the more exciting part of the digital journey. You get to play a couple of games, which will be testing out either your IQ, your EQ, and I would say it's a very simple stage, but there are a couple of things for you to watch out on, which I'll be mentioning about later on. Now, level 3, that's when you guys would receive a link to go through a higher view interview, right? A higher view interview is basically a video interview where someone will be asking you a couple of questions and you'll be filming yourself answering it. And those submissions are the ones that a Unilever recruiter will be reviewing. Level 4 will be the final stage, I would say. Yeah, it's the final stage where you'll be meeting us face to face. With the current situation, a lot of it is hosted virtually. So it could be either in a virtual panel interview, it could either be in a virtual discovery center. And of course, the final destination is to receive the offer from us. So yes, overall, this is how the Unilever application journey looks like. Now, in terms of what I see, the average time taken in terms of clearing level 1, level 2, and level 3, the average time taken is about 7 days, which is a whole lot faster back when we piloted it. I think at the start when we piloted it, we allowed students to take their time in terms of completing the different stages. But in order to hasten the process of shortlisting, offering, overall, we've seen that the average time taken for you guys to be submitting these different stages have been halved essentially. So yes, that's the overall digital journey, and I'll be focusing on level 2 and level 3 in today's session. All right. So now I'm going to be speaking more in terms of the level 2 in greater detail. If you could see the screen, we will be chatting in terms of the content of the virtual games, or what I previously mentioned before as cognitive games. Yeah. So we use a platform called Higher View Games, or Higher View essentially, where we assess psychological traits and cognitive skills via certain gamified assessments. So some of the things that we're looking out for based on the different games that we implement year on year, because it changes, some of the things would be verbal reasoning, logical reasoning, numerical reasoning, especially for those applying for finance, situational judgment, and a couple of personality tests. I would say different functions would have different capabilities tested and different benchmarking scorings based on what we're looking for in the role, the nature of the role. So yeah, just keep an eye out for yourself. Understand the role that you're applying for, so that you know which games should you perform the best in. Yeah, and I wanted to give you guys an example of a game that we previously used before. Of course, we're not using it currently, but we used to use it a couple of years back, for several years in fact. And I think for those who've applied with us perhaps 2 years ago, you guys would have known that we used the balloon game. So essentially a balloon game, you're asked to pump the balloon and bank in your money before it bursts. Essentially, what we're trying to look out here is your appetite for taking risk. The higher your appetite is, there are certain roles that's suitable for you, or certain functions that's suitable for you. Yeah. So that's an example of one of the cognitive assessments that we used to implement a couple of years ago. Of course, it has changed this year. If you want to know what are the assessments implemented this year, click on the application link and you'll see for yourself. But yeah, I wanted to show you guys an example of a cognitive assessment. Okay. Now, we're going to go through in terms of the tips and tricks for the preparation. I'll go through this as slowly and as detailed as I possibly can, because I also don't want to run out of time for our Q&A. So a couple of tips and tricks in terms of preparation. The very first thing is familiarize yourself with how the game-based assessment works. There are a couple of service providers that would give you a couple of practice rounds. So at the top of my head, you could try out Pymetrics. There are a couple of student forums that post like links where you'll be able to try out the games for free. It may not be exactly the games that Unilever uses, but it kind of puts you into the mind space of what exactly will you require to perform the games online. So familiarize yourself. It could genuinely help you with your confidence. Secondly, please take the assessment in a quiet place. a lot of these games that we implement will demand a certain level of concentration. And if you have your friends like speaking over you and like having your friends around, having your family members around, it might distract you a little bit. And you might not be as sharp or as quick in terms of responding on the games, because we do also measure how quick you are. But that's not the main point. That's not a priority point for us. A lot of it is how accurate you are. And most of these games will really demand a certain level of concentration. So that's my second tip. The third tip is please have a stable internet connection. I've received so many student reviews or so many student feedback that, hey, my submission was cut halfway or my games froze. It's mainly because you don't have a stable internet connection. So please make sure that if you have a LAN cable, connect it, or if you happen to be at home all alone and you have the Wi-Fi all to yourself, that's the best time to perform your games. But do make sure that you have a stable internet connection. Okay. Also, don't worry so much if your games froze or your screen froze. Backend, at least for my team and I, we will allow you to either retake the entire stage, or we will allow you to or we will just review you based on what you submitted. Okay, so don't worry so much on that. Lastly, laptop. The use of laptop is so important. I cannot emphasize this more. I know a lot of you are a lot more confident in terms of playing games online via your phone, but I don't recommend that. It's a lot easier to navigate through your laptop than through your phone. I have a lot of students who shared with me that over the phone it's a bit easier, but I would say in terms of reaction time, it's a lot slower than what you're used to, which is over laptop. So it's proven to be easier to navigate through games using laptop. So that's something that I would genuinely share. Okay. Tips and tricks during the cognitive assessment. So earlier was preparation. Now during the assessment itself, what are some of the things that you should look out for yourself? Okay. Number one, if you do require reasonable adjustments for your entire game-based assessment journey, please reach out to us. You can reach out to us via Instagram. You can reach out to us via the application form itself. You can reach out to us via Facebook SG Careers. In Unilever, at least, we are constantly trying to improve ourselves to make sure that we're a company that employs people with disabilities, but not just that, whatever kind of reasonable adjustments or accommodations that's required to provide you guys with barrier-free recruitment journey, feel free to reach out to us. Never feel afraid, never feel that you're going to be discriminated. We embrace that differences. And I would love for you to reach out to me. We'll have a chat about that. Don't worry. Secondly, please read the instruction. Once you read the instructions, you'll be able to feel a lot more confident in terms of what's required from you, what do you need to do in terms of acing the game, how quick do you have to be, how fast do you have to be. That's very important. I have students who misread the instructions, and unfortunately because of that, I'm not able to renew your entire stage. So please read the instructions. Third, clear and positive mind. I cannot emphasize this more because there's going to be different stages in the games that will put you back. In a sense, you feel like you're not performing well enough, or you're feeling that you should have done better. But believe it or not, we do have an AI built into the game that will allow us to understand if you can bounce back from a slip of concentration or from a slip of failure. So keep that in mind when you are attempting the games, because it's helpful for us at least to really understand, is your fear of failure very high? Can you bounce back from failures? So always have a positive mind. Lastly, take breaks in between games. This is something that's pretty important from a perspective of centering yourself once again, making sure that you're not too focused on what you didn't do well before. There are going to be several games in the journey, so definitely take a couple of minutes to breathe, to wipe your sweat, to recenter yourself. It genuinely helps because there's going to be a lot of stages throughout the entire thing. All right, great. So we now will walk you through in terms. I will now walk you through in terms of the video assessment. So what is it, right? I'm sure you guys would have already known about what's the video assessment. At least for Unilever, we do use HireView as a platform to allow students to submit their video assessments to us. Essentially, a HireView interview or HireView submission allows recruiters in Unilever to not just review your answers, but to also see non-verbal cues. So your body movements, your hands, the way you're speaking, the way you're projecting your voice, the way you articulate your content and your structure. Those are something that we also pick up on whenever we review. So always know that it's not just the content that we're looking at. We're also looking at the way you portray yourself, the way you sit up, your facial expressions, your eye movements. And because of the AI, we do pick up quite a lot of things whenever you guys are submitting your video assessment. Okay. So, example of video assessment. So some organizations would ask questions in relation to behavioral situations or situational questions. So, at least for Unilever in itself, here's a hint. We ask quite a lot of case study questions, or I would say situational questions. So if you're a brand manager for a certain portfolio, how are you going to perform so and so if this is the problem that you're facing? So that's something that we use throughout our digital application journey for the different programs. Yeah, so we don't use a lot of behavioral questions. And one of the example that I've put there was something that I tend to use last year ago, 1 year ago. Tell me about a time when you have used data to help you make a decision. So it's a basic question. It could also be asked during a face-to-face interview. So take it as a face-to-face interview, practice makes perfect, and I'll go through a couple of tips now. Great. So preparation for your video interview. Use typical interview questions as your guide and film yourself, right? So if you don't have any case study or example of case study questions, I think you should film yourself in terms of what are the typical interview questions that's asked. Film yourself and observe yourself. When you observe the way you speak, the way you sit, the way your eyes look at the webcam, the way your hands move, your voice projection, it could genuinely help you perform better for HireView, because now you kind of know where you lack or what you need to do to better yourself, essentially. Secondly, of course, quiet surroundings, super important. I've had students who submit their video interviews when it's really noisy and it's super hard for me to understand what they're saying. Ideally, have a quiet surrounding. It doesn't have to be extremely quiet, but it will genuinely help the recruiter review your video interview a lot better. Once again, stable internet connection, super important. I've had so many students reach out to me to say that their video was cut off. It was static, as you can see on the right side of the screen. It just went blank. They couldn't see themselves. They couldn't even submit the video interview. So stable internet connection, super duper important. Fourth, pen and paper within reach. This is super important because I've already shared with you it's a case study questions. Most of the time, you would have to write a couple of ideas down, think about it, think outside the box before you answer the question. So a lot of our HireView questions for the different programs, you give students a couple of minutes to think about their answers. And we've heard your feedback. In fact, we've lengthened the time taken to think through your answers and record it. So back then we used to have students who say, hey Shah, 3 minutes not enough for me to answer your questions. We fed your feedback to my global team, and the global team has decided to extend the time taken for you guys to plan out your answers. So use that to your advantage, and yeah, with the pen and paper, it could definitely help you perform a lot better. Using a laptop is a tip that we recruiters would typically share to our candidates, because if you use the phone, it's just going to constantly shake, and it could potentially make those that are reviewing your video interview go crazy because you can't focus on your face, you can't focus on your submission, and it just makes it a bit harder to screen your video interview. So Make sure you're using a laptop that's stable. You can see you very well. You're seated as how I'm seated, straight up. Project your voice. Lastly, test your mic, especially those that are using AirPods. Typically AirPods, you have to make sure that you test out the audio quality of your voice. A lot of the time, students think that they are being recorded, but they are actually not recorded. So it's just a blank video that I'm watching. So I can see you talk, but I can't hear you. It could be because your mic wasn't connected. The internet was just not stable enough to upload your audio, or your AirPods just not picking up your voice. So please test out your mic. There are a couple of testing stages before you submit or before you even attempt the higher view stage. So please try it out, especially those with wireless earpiece. Okay, great. So we're going to go on to the next part of the presentation, which is the tips and tricks during the video assessment itself. So if you could just go to the next slide. In terms of the tips and tricks during the session, so look at the camera, sit up confidently and answer confidently, right? So try to sit half the seat, I would say. So don't sit fully inwards, don't take up the full space of your seat, because it forces you to really sit up straight and sit up upright. So that genuinely helps. Be articulate and precise. I think is super important. A lot of students forget that they only have about 3-4 minutes to answer per question. And it's really important for you to be very sharp and precise in answering these questions. So pace yourself. Don't be too long-winded, because we don't need you to repeat the questions to us. We need you to answer it. So remove any part of your answers that requires you to set the context. Okay. Thirdly, read through questions carefully and ensure that you're answering every sub-questions yes. Excuse me. So I've had a lot of students who realize that that they are required to answer the sub-questions. When you receive a question, if you click on more, you'll be able to see the 4 questions. And I highly encourage that you make sure you read through all of that before you attempt to answer the questions, okay? Sorry, we'll need to take a 30 seconds break because of my Okay, we're back. Okay, great. Structure. Oh my God, structure is really important also. So structure is back to the third point. When you're answering a question, you definitely require time to structure your thoughts and be precise. One of the things I always tell students is to make sure that you write down your key points, give an example, and make sure you tie off the entire answers so that you'll be able to remind us that this is your point, so we don't get lost in your content. And that's really, really important. And yeah, fun fact, as I mentioned before, Unilever reviews each and every submission. So obviously, please bear with us. Yeah? Great. So yes, in the next slide, if you're feeling confident about the program, check out some of the programs that we definitely have. So the very first program that we have, next slide please, is the UFLB program, which is our graduate program that looks into hiring fresh graduates or the students with less than 2 years of working experience. Now, our graduate program is currently recruiting for the 3 different main functions, so marketing, finance, human resources, and the duration for the program is about 2 to 3 years. So please make sure that you apply for these programs, especially if you're interested in marketing, finance, or HR. Applications are open from 2nd September till 19th of September. And now if you're going to move or let's move to the next slide, which is ULIP. So ULIP is our summer internship basically, and it's open to functions or students who are interested in marketing, finance, and HR. For ULIP, it's a summer internship program that focuses on two main things in terms of your growth. The very first thing is your leadership potential or your leadership training. So during the summer internship, we will be looking at future leaders and thinking about how we could potentially train you to be future leaders, because top performers of our ULIP program will be fast-tracked to our UFLP last selection stage. And secondly, it's also a program that allows you to work on real life projects with real life impact. But because it's a 3 months internship, it's pretty short. I would say it's a very good balance between leadership training and making you guys lead certain projects on behalf of the functions that you are interning with. Okay, so applications will be open from 2nd September to 2nd October. It's open for an entire month. So highly encourage, if you are very, very interested to take on leadership positions in the near future and you want to invest yourself from a perspective of polishing up leadership skills, ULIP is a perfect program for you. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to be speaking about Gen X. So Gen X is our 6 months internship program, super popular among students, especially if you're thinking of doing a part-time stint with us. Some of the job functions that we have, there's a lot to pick from actually. We have consumer market insights, marketing, finance, customer development, supply chain / procurement, HR, and data analytics. So applications will be open from 2nd September to 2nd October, much like ULIP. Now, the main difference between ULIP and Gen X is that Gen X fully invests into your employability and your ability to lead or to have hardcore work experiences, even while you're doing well in school. So I highly encourage that if you want to have a head start in your career, whether or not is it with Unilever or with other organizations, Gen X will give you a very, very good shot, because you guys will be leading a lot of our programs or a lot of our projects, our strategy building front, at the very front of it, and seeing the real life impact that you guys have. All right, that's the end of the presentation. I'm kind of losing my voice. I guess, Jen, if you could start with the Q&A session.
Yes, thank you, Shah, for a very, very, I would say, insightful session, and a very passionate one, too. You really get to see what she does on a daily basis. We'll let her take a little bit of a water break, but at the same time, I do have a lot of questions coming in that I'm just going to get started on asking. Really great questions from the students, and if you have any more questions, feel free to pop it in the Q&A box on the right side of your screen. So we have 10 minutes-ish, 15 minutes, so let's get started. First, I have two questions that actually come from Philip. Philip is asking, how much more effective have digital interviews been than other traditional recruitment methods? And have there been any challenges in implementing digital interviews to recruit new talent?
Good questions. How much more effective have digital applications been more than the traditional recruitment methods? I think when we piloted it back in 2016, we were quite scared of the impact on our applicants, right? Because it's the first time that we're piloting several digital stages for our applicants, and it might be a pushback, in fact, because it's going to take you guys a bit of time to submit your application instead of traditionally just fill up an application form, submit it, wait a bit of time, and then get shortlisted for the final interview. I would say with digital interview, as much as there are a couple of assessments along the way, it allows us to really assess the talent, assess the skills, the competencies of the talent before we shortlist them into the final stage. So we personally get to know you, right? It's not just through a resume or through a phone screening. We actually get to know you slightly better than a traditional method. So I would say it's a lot more effective. It's a lot more efficient also, because now you guys would receive feedback from us about your performance. So yeah, that's my answer for the first question. And the second part of the question is, have there been any challenges in implementing digital applications? I think at the beginning, like in the beginning, as mentioned before, it was seen as a little bit of a pushback because now it takes you longer to submit an application. But besides that, I foresee, I would say more in terms of coming up with reasonable accommodations to accept or for applicants of various backgrounds to click on apply, right? So if you're someone who's a little bit more shy and you wouldn't want to share or request for reasonable accommodations, I feel that digital application journey might not be as effective, and that poses a challenge to recruiters who would more than love to come up with reasonable accommodations for such applicants. So that's definitely a challenge that we're doing in Unilever. Of course, we are constantly reaching out. We're constantly asking our candidates, do you require this? Do you require that? Are you comfortable? So yeah, with more aggressive, I would say, more aggressive ways of putting us out there to share that, hey, we're more than happy to receive your applications. Just ask us for any reasonable accommodations. That's our way to overcome the challenge when it comes into implementing digital applications. And I hope I answered your question, Philip.
I think, Shah, you definitely did. And if you guys have attended Unicon Day 1, you would know that Unilever is really, really big on diversity and inclusion. We had a whole session dedicated to how we want to try to bring diversity and inclusion into the company. So definitely a challenge, but something that we're working towards. It's a great question we have over there. I'm going to move on to the second question by Joy. Joy also had two questions. So I guess there's a lot of questions going on here. So for Joy, the first one, it's about during a group virtual setting, so let's say assessment center, what are some of the things that you could do to stand out? I think she's particularly concerned over the limitation of only having one speaker speaking at a time because it's a virtual setting. I'll let you take that one first, and then I'll pass the other one to you, Shah.
Very good question. In fact, we've had the very first virtual discovery center last year because of COVID. And I think it was an experience not just for Unilever, but for our candidates also. They were wondering what's expected of them, if it's the same stage but hosted online, what are the things I should prepare for, what are the things I should look out for. And this is where candidate preparation is something that I feel Unilever is constantly trying to up itself. We always want to make sure that we over-communicate what's required out of a virtual discovery center so that we can prepare you guys to be more comfortable, a lot more confident of yourself. Now, in terms of standing out, especially, I agree, especially with the limitation of having one speaker at a time, this is where the role of a recruiter plays. It's such a big role, I would say. Before we go into a virtual discovery center, we would always remind our candidates that, okay, look, everyone would be a part of a group activity. You would definitely have some time to speak, but also allow your team members to speak. And if they don't manage to give their team members any time to speak, that's also a part that we assess. And it's also part of a feedback that we would give to the candidates. So be very careful and be very conscious of your team members, especially since a lot of organizations are conducting virtual discovery center. If you are going for a discovery center that's looking for a future leader, definitely getting a leader that's able to gain everyone's support, allow everyone to share their own thoughts, and encourage, if you see a team member who's not speaking out and you encourage your team member to speak out a bit more, that's something that we look out for too. So yeah, be yourself, be genuine. I would say being able to stand out is something that is super hard to do these days, especially via a virtual platform. But one of the tips I always share my candidates is to always be themselves, is to always be genuine, because we can see it if you're faking it online actually. But we want to meet you. We want to get to know you better. So a group setting is not just where the assessment happens. We also have one-on-one sessions where that's where we'll get to know you a lot better, and that's where you get the floor to speak. So that's something to look out for yourself if you want to stand out.
And I think adding on to Shah's point, sometimes standing out doesn't necessarily mean more airtime. Standing out can be done in several ways. like, being more attentive, watching out for what others are saying, and things like that. So that's another thing to take note of. So we have another question, again by Joy, around behavioral questions. So for behavioral questions, do you encourage to use examples in external roles, right, beyond relevant internship experiences? The example that she gave of was tutoring children virtually. So, examples, would you encourage them to use that even though they're not internship related?
For behavioral questions, as much as it's a question to test out or to seek or to understand your skills and abilities, your competencies, I would say use evidences or examples that are a bit more relevant. But if you find an example that you feel could demonstrate the question or the ability that they are assessing, that's fine also. The way Unilever sees it, or the way we had the earlier session today, using a star format would genuinely help you perform better during interviews, whether or not it's an experience that's relatable to the position you're hiring, to the position we are hiring for or not. So don't feel afraid to share with a recruiter any relatable experience based on the behavioral questions that we're asking. Most of the time, we tend to look more in terms of your thought process, in terms of your ability to articulate your answers. These are very important soft skills that we're looking out for, especially, I would say, in an FMCG context. Yeah.
Nice. So we are almost running out of time. So I'm just going to take one last question. I think this question is honestly going to answer a lot of the duplicated questions that were very similar, type of ask. So this one's around, hey Shah, could you share what are some of the features that the AI system look for at our video response? I think Shah has already previously mentioned that we actually do screen through every single one of the video responses. But Shah, if there's anything you'd like to add around this area, feel free.
So in relation to AI, I think it's a very touchy topic, I think, in different markets, mainly because there is a lot of localization effort that goes into it. What we do in Singapore, at least, we work very, very closely with our global team to ensure that our AI is constantly and consistently updated. So what an AI also looks out for is not just the words that you use. If you're interviewing for a marketing function, you keep saying the word digital, it's not genuinely going to help your case, because from a backend's perspective, the AI is just going to pick up and wonder, like, are they using digital to their advantage, or are they just saying it for the sake of saying it? And we do have a bell curve that goes with the AI all the time. So it renews and revamps itself. It gets better and better because students get better and better also. I would say don't think too much of the AI because we review your video submissions anyway. I would say focus on how you can improve yourself. I've had candidates who made it into the program even though they failed the last year, but they tried again, right? And the thing about these digital games or these video interview, it's really the way you mature and the way you take advantage of your knowledge that you've learned for the last 1 year after failing the assessment. So your answer is going to change definitely, and that could genuinely help you perform better. So don't focus too much on the AI. We review everyone. Don't worry. That's why it takes us a bit of time before we reach out. So yes, please bear with us. I hope that answers the question, Janice.
Amazing. It really does. I think to kind of sum it all up, it's a little bit like, don't try to just ace the game, but try to figure out a way to bring your best self forward, whether it's through the gamified assessments or the digital interviews or even the assessment center. I think with that, we're going to be closing off today's session. I hope that the session has been really insightful for a lot of you guys. I also saw a lot of questions around the application. So if you want to just head over to the Brand World booth, you can actually find a lot of information about the applications for the internship and the graduate programs we have currently open. You will also see, who is eligible to apply and questions like that, which I see a lot in the Q&A chat. So close it all off. You still have about an hour left to kind of explore the platform, to play the many games available on the platform, to gain points and also win Unilever products. Also, be sure to visit our Instagram page at Unilever SG Careers for more information, and we'll also be answering one of those unanswered questions over there. So I hope everyone has had a good session and have a great day ahead. Thank you. Bye bye.